Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to cut through the noise, give you the crucial knowledge you need to really get to grips with complex topics. And today we are taking on a really significant piece of American history, one that honestly still casts a long shadow over the present day. We're talking about the rise and the lasting legacy of the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws. We've looked at historical sources, including exploring Jim Crow, its legacy, and the Black Codes in America to give you a shortcut to really understanding this. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. So to really get this, you need to picture the scene. It's 1865. The American Civil War has just ended, and the country's facing this huge challenge. How do you integrate millions of newly freed African Americans into society? It's right then, in that immediate aftermath, that the Black Codes start appearing. And their purpose was, well, starkly clear. It was about reestablishing control, restricting the freedoms Black Americans had just won, maintaining white supremacy, keeping that social order in the South, basically ensuring they stayed in a subordinate position economically and socially. And these codes immediately hit daily life. I mean, everything, jobs, voting, even where people were allowed to be.
So it wasn't just social pressure then, it was the law itself being used as a tool, actively creating a system of, well, subjugation.
That's it, exactly.
How did that immediate legislative reaction then morph into something even more rigid, more pervasive?
Well, the Black Codes didn't just vanish. They really paved the way for Jim Crow laws. These laws took hold mainly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and they truly institutionalized racial segregation. The name itself, Jim Crow, came from a minstrel show character, right? It became this shorthand for a system that didn't just separate people. It actively crippled the lives of African Americans, turned everyday spaces into these constant struggles for dignity. Jim Crow laws systematically enforced racial separation in almost every part of American life.
It sounds like, as you put it before we started, a design flaw, built right into the economy and the social fabric.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
A fundamental design flaw. And its impact, well, we're still dealing with the consequences today.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, how those historical threads are woven into the society we see now.
Absolutely. We're looking at the very origins of some devastating socioeconomic outcomes and this long-lasting legacy of racism and inequality that continues to echo.
So let's dive a bit deeper into those Black Codes first. You said they came right after the war.
Immediately after, 1865. Southern states passed them almost instantly. It was a direct attempt to replace the legal structure of slavery with something new, but, still controlling the lives of newly freed African Americans, making sure white supremacy stayed put. And while each state had slightly different versions, they all shared these common goals: suppressing civil rights.
What kind of things were in them specifically?
Well, many mandated labor contracts, forcing Black Americans to work for incredibly low wages. It felt a lot like slavery, just under a different name. And if you didn't have one of these contracts, well, then harsh vagrancy laws could get you arrested. They basically criminalized not having a job or a contract. Plus, these laws stripped away basic rights, prohibiting Black Americans from owning land, serving on juries, or even testifying against white people in court. Think about that. Mississippi, for instance, had a specific law saying Black Americans couldn't run a business without buying an expensive permit, deliberately hindering any economic independence.
Wow. It's just so blatant. A systematic effort to push people down, block any chance at real equality right from the start. The speed is what gets me, right after the war ended. Was there anything like that historically, such a quick, widespread legal reaction after a major conflict?
Not really on this scale or with this specific purpose. This was pretty unique. A coordinated effort to write white supremacy into the law books, directly undermining emancipation, the promise of freedom. And that effort only intensified with Jim Crow.
Right, the transition.
Yeah, the move from Black Codes to Jim Crow, it was a major shift. Because while the codes set up a framework for discrimination, Jim Crow became much more rigid, more pervasive. It wasn't just custom anymore. It was the law dictating every single interaction, every water fountain, every train car, every school, legally reinforcing second-class citizenship. And this got a huge boost in 1896. The Supreme Court decision, Plessy v. Ferguson.
Ah, yes. Separate but equal.
Exactly, that infamous doctrine. The court upheld it, which basically gave Jim Crow segregation a massive legal stamp of approval. It became even more entrenched after that.
It's hard to wrap your head around how deeply embedded these practices became, affecting every single part of daily life. The psychological toll must have been immense.
Oh, absolutely pervasive. Imagine facing legal barriers every single day, everywhere you went. In education, Jim Crow meant separate schools, and they were almost never equal. Black schools consistently got less funding, worse facilities, transportation, same story, black people forced to the back of the bus, separate train cars, and it went beyond that. Parks, libraries, hospitals, even restrooms. Segregated. It shows just how far-reaching Jim Crow was. This created an environment where racial discrimination wasn't just accepted, it was normalized by the law itself. And the effects on African American communities were devastating, lasting for generations.
So let's talk about that legacy, how these things, though formally gone, still echo today.
Right, the legacy is undeniable. Jim Crow and the Black Codes continue to shape the U.S. sociopolitical landscape. They created these deep-seated disparities for African Americans that persist. These laws weren't just temporary rules. Their effects became woven into the very fabric of society.
So when we look at today's struggles for equity, what are the clearest lines we can draw back to this history?
You see it clearly in several areas. Education is a big one. The legacy of underfunded, under-resourced schools under Jim Crow created cycles of underachievement, socioeconomic inequality. Those gaps haven't just disappeared. It often leads to disadvantages in higher education, the job market. It ripples through generations.
Yeah.
Then there's wealth accumulation, or rather the lack of it.
How so?
The Black Codes and Jim Crow were masters at preventing Black Americans from building wealth, denying land ownership, fair wages, access to loans, even legal recourse in business disputes. These are the tools for building generational wealth. So that economic design flaw we mentioned, it's still visible today in the huge racial wealth gap. And politically, too, systematically stripping away voting rights.
Right, disenfranchisement.
Exactly. It severely weakened the ability of African Americans to influence policies affecting their own lives. And the fight for voting rights, as you know, is still very much alive today. These historical roots, they connect directly to current issues like police brutality, voter suppression efforts. They're contemporary echoes of that painful past.
It's vital to remember this wasn't just abstract law. People lived under this, and importantly, people fought back. Can you talk about the resistance, the acts of defiance?
Absolutely. That's crucial. This wasn't just endured passively. There was incredible courage and strategic resistance. Think about the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. It wasn't just about sitting at the back of the bus. It was a collective refusal by Black citizens to use the buses at all. Imagine the coordination, the personal sacrifice, walking for miles, organizing carpools. But it worked. It hit the city's economy hard and, just as importantly, it galvanized national attention and support for civil rights in a way little else had before.
A truly pivotal moment.
Definitely. And then, just a few years later, 1960, you have the Greensboro sit-ins. Young Black college students just walked into a Woolworth's, sat down at the segregated lunch counter, and politely asked to be served. And they stayed, day after day, facing insults, threats, violence sometimes. But their quiet, nonviolent defiance was incredibly powerful. It sparked similar sit-ins across the South, directly challenging the legality and morality of Jim Crow in public spaces.
That quiet courage is just astounding. What made those specific actions, the boycott, the sit-ins, such powerful catalysts?
I think it was their directness and their nonviolence. They exposed the ugliness and injustice of segregation for the whole nation, even the world, to see. And crucially, these weren't just spontaneous outbursts. They were organized. You had organizations like the NAACP fighting crucial battles in the courts, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, led by Dr. King, organizing mass protests and direct action on the ground. This collective effort, this combination of legal challenges and grassroots organizing, eventually led to major legislative victories, namely the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These finally started to dismantle the legal structure of Jim Crow.
A testament to resilience. But there's another layer to this, isn't there? The difficulty some people have in acknowledging this history.
Yes, that's a really complex but important part of the legacy. There's often a resistance, particularly among some white Americans, to fully engage with this history. Why? Well, there are a few reasons, I think. Sometimes it's a denial of the historical injustices themselves. It challenges those cleaner, maybe more sanitized versions of American history many people learned. For others, acknowledging the depth of these injustices means grappling with present-day privileges. Privileges that are, let's be honest, partly inherited from these discriminatory systems. And that reckoning can bring up difficult feelings, guilt, maybe fear, defensiveness. So it often leads to just avoiding the conversation altogether.
And the consequence of that avoidance, if we don't talk about it, if that ignorance persists.
Yeah. Well, the unwillingness to confront the past just perpetuates misunderstanding in the present. It makes it harder to grasp why certain inequalities still exist. And this refusal, this avoidance, it absolutely impacts current debates. Discussions around things like reparations, civil rights enforcement, systemic racism, they often get sidetracked or based on incomplete understandings because the full historical context isn't acknowledged. It diminishes the voices calling for change because the foundation of their arguments isn't fully seen.
It really underscores that engaging honestly with the past isn't about assigning blame. It's about building a shared understanding needed for any real progress.
Exactly. And that's why this history remains so relevant today. Jim Crow laws and black codes might be off the books, formally abolished, but their effects, still visible. In social dynamics, economic realities, political structures, you see persistent racial disparities in education outcomes, employment rates, healthcare access, the criminal justice system. It's clear systemic racism is still deeply embedded, even if it takes different forms now. And the ongoing movements for racial justice today, they draw heavily on the memory of this history. Activists use these narratives, the stories of Jim Crow and the Black Codes, to underscore the urgency of today's issues, to advocate for change.
So looking forward, what's being done? What are the pathways being explored?
There are ongoing efforts on multiple fronts. Legislative action is one, things like criminal justice reform bills, efforts to protect voting rights, pushes for more equitable policing practices. There are also discussions, sometimes contentious ones, around reparative policies, and education reform is key. Making sure school curricula include a comprehensive understanding of this history and its lasting impact. That's crucial for future generations. Alongside that, you have community initiatives, open dialogues, workshops, cultural events designed to raise awareness, create spaces for sharing experiences, build empathy and solidarity. Ultimately, it requires both policy changes aimed at dismantling systemic barriers and promoting equity, perhaps with things like restorative justice and a continued community-level work.
It sounds like that critical reflection, that acknowledgement you mentioned, is really the foundation for any meaningful dialogue or healing. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels clear that understanding Jim Crow and the Black Codes isn't just history homework. It's fundamental to building a more just future. We've seen how these systems were deliberately designed not just to separate, but to dehumanize, to disenfranchise. The Black Codes, especially, are such a stark reminder of how quickly and legally racial disparities were cemented.
Absolutely. And the echoes of those laws are still shaping social dynamics today. It makes the ongoing conversation about systemic racism absolutely vital. Understanding this history helps us acknowledge the progress made, yes, but also grasp the enormous amount of work still needed to achieve real equity and justice for everyone.
And for you listening, your role isn't just passive learning. It really involves active engagement, educating yourself, talking to others, supporting policies that promote genuine equality, and taking informed action in your own communities.
If we want to envision a future truly marked by equality and justice, it really does hinge on our collective willingness to face these uncomfortable truths, to acknowledge the struggles that, for many, are far from over, the legacy of Jim Crow and the Black Codes. It serves as both a profound warning and hopefully a catalyst, a call to action for all of us in building that more equitable future.